in the midst of having to navigate growing up
Mm-hmm.
on the East Coast, in the streets. Thank God for mentors. Thank God for basketball, because that's what really kept me out of trouble. That's what also took me to a lot of different places, playing sports, interacting with various types of people. I mean, white millionaires to white people on welfare, blacks in the hood, different places. So a lot of exposure there. So being able to navigate that, I felt like, okay, I can't let certain people down, family members, myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a lot riding on you.
So it's a
it's a
lot,
lot.
right?
Yeah.
My siblings, I had 2 sisters, and I felt like I had to set the bar high for them. So for me, there was a point also where I'd moved back to Maryland for a couple years. I lived with my father, mind the fact that he wasn't in the house growing up.
Right.
So that was a different dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
You got 2 men.
Don't know as much about each other, right? Maybe if he...
We would spend summers with our father, for the most part.
Okay.
And, he was always challenging us. We talked to him over the phone, but it was different being in a house because as a young male, there was some animosity there too.
Right.
But we got to a point to where we were butting heads, and I was given that order: you either go to school or you get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a friend that was attending Morgan at the time, and he came back. He would come back home every so often, and he said, "Hey, man, get your Sunday's best. We're going to go to homecoming." I was still in high school at the time. So I went up, pulled my slacks and a nice shirt.
You were excited, huh?
I was excited. So we went and hung out, and I was like, okay, this is what it's like if you can hang out and have a good time and get an education. I was like, where do I sign up?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the delay for me, whether it was applying to different colleges and schools, really despite my father at that time, because we had some conversations. But I think that was one of the first turning points in my journey, was being able to get out of my environment, get into an environment to where people were attending school. And at the end of the day, to me, that equaled at some point, you got to be successful. So that was the first turning point. So college went great. I'd say the second turning point was right before my first marriage. Just looking at my family dynamic, the dynamic that I had with my siblings, the dynamic that I had with my mother, that was a pretty tough one. And I think that was one where when you talk about breaking free, and I see this in the African American community, and it's kind of almost like a default when the father's out of the home, especially in single parent homes, when the father's out of the home and there's a male there, the male's given this responsibility at a very young age. And for me, that was the age of 8. And so before I got married, I started to take a look back. And
so you mean that you're the man of the house?
I'm the
type.
man.
I got to take care of everyone.
I got to take care of everyone. I'm the man of the house. At 8.
Poor thing.
Exactly, right?
It's a lot of responsibility for an 8-year-old.
And I get why we do that. I don't necessarily agree with it, though. Because I think, we're created, again, going back to seasons and times where at 8, you're a child, right? You're not even a teenager yet. And there's certain things that happens to us over time with our bodies. We become a teenager, you go through puberty, things like that. And I think that's how God created us for specific reasons. But to give a young male, young boy, young kid that much responsibility at 8 is a lot. I mean, we've got adults that can't even handle
That's true.
the responsibility of taking care of their kids, but you put that on an 8-year-old. So I actually met with she was the pastor at the time, and we were just having some conversations. She just started really speaking into my situation, and I was like, wow, okay.
She read you, huh?
She told me my whole life without even, I mean, this was all within a matter of like 20 minutes of just being in her presence. She's like, can we talk for a second? And she just started, I was like, man, like I don't think we even had Google at the time. Like you can Google certain things.
That's how you know God is real, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she just started speaking into my life, and she talked, and that's what she had shared with me, just the responsibilities that I was given at a young age, that's not how things were created. And she said, me being the male, growing up, I mean, my sisters would come to me like I was their father. Even to this day, sometimes they come to me like I'm their dad. And so there was a point where I had to have a conversation start with my sisters to say, hey, I'm your brother. Because growing up, we would have these conversations. We'd be on the phone talking, and let's say, for example, they would want to go buy a car. I would give them, hey, here's what you need to consider. Here's what you need to take a look at. Make sure you got this amount of money. And let's say they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. I'd be upset. I'd be angry, screaming at them, shouting at them. I told you shouldn't have done that. This is what I told you to do. You didn't listen. So then they're upset. They're crying. Mm-hmm. And so using that as an example, that's something their father would probably do, right? Mm-hmm. Be upset. I told you this, but I'm their brother. So once I was able to change that dynamic of our relationship, that kind of released them to go forth and do some things on their own and not necessarily have to depend on me. We still open dialogue, open conversation, but that kind of set them free to go forth and do things. For me, that set me free. I'm no longer worried about having to tell them what to do and whether or not they did it. I didn't get upset about it. I'm their brother. I'm just here to give you some brotherly advice. Mm-hmm. So that really changed the dynamic of our relationship. And then came mom. Mm-hmm. And that was a tough one. Because, when you're the male of the house, you tend to have this, it's almost like a husband-wife relationship, but you're the son.
Right.
And so this pastor pointed out to me, and she said, you're not your mother's husband. Your mother calls you, your mother does this, the things that most women would probably do to their spouses, right? And that's the role that I was playing in that space, whether I realize it or not. And she said, when you think about it, if a mother's married to their son, what is that? I was like, oh, I don't know. At the time, I was like, I don't know. She's like, that's incest.
Right.
Right? She said that the relationship is not created to be like that. You're a son, and that's your mother. And again, we see that in a lot of the African American community.
That